In the best of the rest of the news, with just months to go before it hosts the 2016 Summer Olympics, Brazil is all of a sudden in the midst of a very serious political crisis. Last week, the country's democratically elected left-wing president, Dilma Rousseff, was suspended from office following a vote in the Brazilian Senate to initiate impeachment proceedings against her. She's accused of corruption and misuse of campaign funds. Right-wing Vice President Michael Temer, who is also under investigation for corruption, will take Rousseff's place as head of state for the time being. All of this, of course, raises some interesting questions. I mean, why was a right-winger serving as the vice president for a left-wing president in the first place? And why, if he's under investigation for corruption charges, is that vice president even qualified to serve as president? Joining me now to help explain what's going on in Brazil and generally in South America is Mark Weisbrot, co-director, co-founder, and co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, CEPR, president of Just Foreign Policy, and author of several books, including his most recent, Failed: What the Experts Got Wrong About the Global Economy. Mark, it's great to have you back with us.
Great to be here, Tom.
It's always fascinating talking with you. So what's going on in Brazil? How did it begin? What led to this moment in Brazilian history?
Well, what led to the moment, I would say, is the right wing there couldn't win elections for 4 elections in a row, so almost 16 years. And, well, actually, it's not through the 4th term yet. So the Workers' Party has won 4 presidential elections. And so they took advantage of this recession.
They being?
A coalition of the right, basically, and center-right forces took advantage of this recession that the economy's in to go after and get rid of her through an impeachment proceeding, even though there's no impeachable offense. They're not, and they also took advantage of the media. The media is a huge force there. It's kind of like if you had Fox News here with 70% of the media. And so they just, there was a corruption scandal and all the parties were involved, including the Workers' Party, although not as much as the other ones. And so they created an impression, and probably a lot of your viewers think that she's impeached for something to have to do with corruption, but in fact she's being impeached for basically an accounting manipulation of sorts that all the other presidents did. It's just basically using money from a state bank to make the budget balance look a little better than it was.
Wow. I mean, that's the kind of stuff Scott Walker does.
It's kind of stuff the federal government has done too.
So, yeah, I mean, the narrative that I get from like, the kind of Wall Street Journal narrative, the conventional American, semi-conservative, mainstream narrative of what's going on in South America in general, is that, we've had a couple of decades, maybe a decade and a half anyway, of somewhat left-wing governments in South America, in Argentina, in Venezuela, and in Ecuador, and Paraguay, and in Brazil, and Chile, and they're all failing. And they were only successful because, in Venezuela they were exporting oil, and it was over $100 a barrel, so they could have a healthy welfare state. And now that the price of commodities has come down, or at least the price of oil has come down, these governments that were always just based on this fiction that you can take, the money and make the people happy are disintegrating. Is there any truth to that narrative? Not really.
I mean, there's truth to the fact that the Latin American region is in recession this year. It's projected to shrink by about 0.5%. Didn't grow last year. So yeah, it's been affected by the world economy. That narrative that you hear in Washington is grossly exaggerated. First of all, it leaves out why did all these left governments get elected? You went from 0 left governments in the region to governing the majority of the region since 1998. That is, in that period, in the last 15 years. So how did that happen? Because you had 20 years where you had very strong influence from the United States and the International Monetary Fund, and there was a terrible economic failure. For 20 years, you had almost no growth of income per person.
During the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, during the 80s and 90s. And then they turned this around, and they brought the poverty rate down from 2002, when it was higher than it was you know, 20 years, more than 20 years earlier. It was 44%, came down to 28% in the region. And a lot of that was the result of these left governments, the economic growth, the employment they created, the programs that they had. Brazil is a good example. Why couldn't they get rid of the Workers' Party? Because they reduced poverty by 55%, extreme poverty by 65%, doubled the minimum wage in real terms. And yes, it was sustainable, especially in Brazil. They have $350 billion in reserves. They're not facing any kind of balance of payments crisis.
So over the last couple of years, what mistakes have the Dilma Rousseff administration made that would cause Brazil to be in a recession? If they have got $350 billion in reserves, they would have the ability to stimulate themselves out of this recession, you would think.
Yes, and they should have, and I think that was the big mistake. After 2010, where they grew 7.5% that year, they started to slow the economy. They tightened.
Did she buy the austerity sales pitch?
Well, she appeared to. I mean, I don't know what she really believed. There's a lot of pressure from the banks. Banks are very powerful there. They're like Wall Street here, only even more powerful relative to the political system, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
And so they put a lot of pressure on her. And she did, the government did cut public investment very sharply, cut spending, raised interest rates at the wrong time, and did help push the economy in recession. I think then that's an important lesson. They wouldn't be in this kind of trouble today if it wasn't for that.
How did she end up with a conservative vice president?
Well, that's part of the deal making in Brazil. You know, the Workers' Party can't win the Congress. It's a very corrupt system, and it's set up to be corrupt. You don't have parties like you have in most countries that you know of, where there's some kind of, except for the Workers' Party, most of the parties, you know, are more just candidates who try to get money from various interests. And
so they're collections of factions rather than ideological, holistic
And they're really
parties.
corrupt. I mean, it's hard to get anything through Congress without bribes, you know, in that system. So, you know, that's part of the story. And, you know, there's also an international dimension to this story that I think a lot of the media here, of course, is missing, and that is the United States has been trying to get rid of all these left governments the whole time, and they succeeded in some, as you know. You know, there was a military coup in Honduras, which
in 2009.
In 2009, which, you know, Hillary Clinton wrote in her memoirs that she, in her book, that she helped, worked, and successfully prevent the democratically elected president from going back. And
she supported the coup.
She supported the consolidation of the coup, for sure, and helped it succeed.
Why would a progressive administration, the Obama administration, be supporting right-wing movements in South and Central America, illegally overthrowing democratically elected left-wing governments?
Well, they're still doing it. I mean, you know, President Obama went, his last trip, he went to Cuba, but he also went to Argentina to support and praise the new right-wing president there. And then his administration unblocked the loans that they were blocking from multilateral lending agencies to Argentina, again, to show support for the right-wing government. They had blocked these loans under the prior left government. And then also in Brazil, you see they're more careful in terms of they don't want to say anything. But right during the impeachment of Dilma, the leader of the impeachment in the Senate, Eleições Nunes, came to the United States and met with Tom Shannon, number 3 person in the State Department, the guy who's really in charge of Latin America policy. And, you know, Shannon didn't have to meet with him. That was a signal. That was a way of showing the opposition the United States is on their side.
So we're saying to all the right-wing governments in Central and South America, wink, wink, nod, nod, we're on your side.
Yeah, and
the movements as well.
And regime change is something that
is acceptable.
They will support.
That's bizarre. Is this like, have we reached this dystopian time when, you know, the multinational corporations in the United States and the media, who don't talk about this in the United States, and the multinational corporations in Brazil and Argentina and other countries in South America, and their media, who are all corporate now, or, you know, sort of like Fox News, have become the tail that wags the dog of what should be government?
Well, it's a very, very powerful influence, and it always has been. I mean, that's what really changed in the 21st century, and the U.S. is trying to roll it back. What changed is the country's gotten much more independent. You know, when Lula ran for president in 2002, he sat down with his opponents and the International Monetary Fund, and the fund told them what the economic policy was going to be for the first couple of years, no matter who won the election. That's how it used to be. And they got rid of the IMF, and they did much better. They changed a lot of economic policy. And the U.S. is trying to roll it back, not so much as they care about the economic policy of these countries, and it's not even so much corporate driven. It's really a very simple thing. It's about power. They want all of these countries to line up with their foreign policy. And usually, you know, in recent decades, they can only get the right-wing ones. And then, you know, a few years ago, they couldn't even get Colombia because the left governments had changed the norms in the region so much that even right-wing governments wouldn't support U.S. Foreign policy there. And so that's what they're trying to get. You know, the new foreign minister of Brazil under this new government, he's somebody who ran for president in 2010, José Serra, and he ran on a platform, a foreign policy platform, trashing all of his neighbors, going against Bolivia, accusing them of collaborating with drug trafficking, criticizing them for opposing the coup in Honduras and opposing the United States. So that's what they're getting if they get this government to stick. You know, they're going to get a foreign minister who's going to do what they want.
Wow, that's absolutely remarkable. Mark, I so appreciate your in-depth knowledge of the region and your willingness to come here and share it with us. Mark Weisbrot.
Thank you.
It's great having you with us.
Great to be
Thank you
here.
so much, Mark.